more on it, I want to bring in Gabriel Noronha now, Executive Director of Polaris National Security and a former State Department advisor on Iran. Gabriel, good to have you back with us.
Hey, always a pleasure to be on here.
All right, well, so from where I'm sitting, it looks like Iran is trying to meddle in the election, and they're trying to give Kamala Harris an assist to make her the victor. What am I missing?
No, I think that's about it. I think what we've seen is Iran has made the internal decision that a Kamala Harris presidency would be, or even a Biden presidency back in the days, what they thought would be massively and advantageous to its interests. And so they said, we're going to weigh in on this election, and we're going to try to denigrate Trump, who, as everyone remembers, was very hostile to the Iranian regime and its interests. The maximum pressure campaign he instituted deprived the regime of $200 billion versus the sort of maximum appeasement policy of the Biden-Harris administration gave them about $100 billion in sanctions relief. So for the Iranians, it was a pretty easy decision, I think, of which side to weigh in on. But now we've seen them actually weighing in, trying to hack the Trump campaign, trying to give beneficial materials to the Democrat campaigns, and now at least the kudos I will give is to this administration's intelligence community for actually coming out and saying this is what's happening. That's a good standard procedure to be doing here.
The Kamala campaign is swearing up and down that they haven't even seen any of this material, and they haven't used any of this material. What do we know about of how far-reaching this material, whatever this material is? I mean, I'm not even we don't even know if there's anything even scandalous in it. It's probably just campaign mail.
What I've heard is that they actually got the opposition research the Trump campaign itself was doing on the VP candidates who was looking to vet. So we know they were vetting Ben Carson and Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance and a couple others. And what we know is that they were obviously, all campaigns do this. They say what are this candidate's strengths, their weaknesses, find some stories. And so we know that at a minimum was being hacked by the Iranians and distributed. Now, I'll have to say, the Iranians were a little lazy here. What the Russians did back in 2016 with WikiLeaks was a lot more sophisticated. They had sort of this veneer of credible doubt. Here, they just basically went and emailed reporters and emailed the campaign staff and said, hey, we got this from the Trump campaign, please take it and publish it. So it's surprising we haven't seen the stories out in the media yet, but what could certainly be happening here is the Harris campaign using the information and just saying they got it from somewhere else. We have no idea if that's happening and no way to disprove that.
Yeah, they could just reconstruct it and then pretend like they didn't see it from anywhere else. But and a number of news outlets, as you point out, have been sent this information as well. Politico had reported in July that it received emails containing internal communications from senior Trump campaign officials and a research dossier, as you point out, that the campaign had put together on J.D. Vance. The New York Times and the Washington Post also reported that they have been sent similar documents, including a 271-page document on J.D. Vance dating back to February. So you have a number of news outlets who are deeply sympathetic to the Biden-Harris administration who now have the Oppo file that the Trump campaign put together on J.D. Vance because they were doing their due diligence?
That's exactly right. You've got it. And, when I, back in school, there'd be people who would say, hey, can I take your homework and see what the answer is? They might not copy your work exactly, but they'll go and they'll change a few words around, but they know what the answer is, and they're just trying to cheat off of it. So that certainly could have been done here. Yeah. And again, what's amazing here is the blatantness with which Iran is doing this. There's a degree to which they didn't even seem to care that they've been caught. They don't have the best intelligence services in the world. Israel's penetrated them completely. But either way, this should be a red flag that Iran wants to meddle in our elections, and they've got the ability and willingness to do this. Back in the 2020 election, I think a lot of people forget this as well. They stole voter registration rolls. They were hacking into election websites and data centers in Alaska and possibly other states as well. So this is not the first time that they're meddling, but this is an effort to go way deeper and more advanced to try to compromise this election.
Let me, I want to move to another topic on Iran that you and I have discussed before, and it's the extent to which the Iranians have infiltrated our own government. There's an Iran envoy by the name of Robert Malley, who's been the subject of a lot of scrutiny because he seems to have a deep connection to the Iranians, and so much so that the Harris-Biden administration had suspended him, I guess. And what can you tell us about that? What's the latest on that saga?
So we have just received a Inspector General report from the State Department that was issued to Congress and just made public today. And it tells about how the senior State Department officials completely bungled the removal of Malley from the security clearance. They didn't tell anyone besides a few senior folks. And so Malley was walking around the State Department. He was still on his official email, and no one knew that his clearance was suspended. So senior officials were going to go share classified materials with him, and some of that was pulled back last minute. One thing, he had no supervisor this entire time for 2 months when he had no clearance before he was eventually suspended without leave. And this is classic government fashion. All the senior officials from Wendy Sherman, the deputy secretary, to the number 3 Victoria Nuland, all sort of said, well, we thought it was someone else's job to monitor him. We thought it was someone else's job to tell him what he couldn't do, but it wasn't my job. And then they said, well, I assumed someone else was watching him and keeping him accountable, but it wasn't me because I assumed someone else was doing it. That, I think, is bears a lot of resemblance to what happened in Afghanistan. Everyone thought it was someone else's job to do it, and so nothing got done. One particularly egregious example that's in the report is that he was at a private dinner function with a foreign country who believed that he was still acting in full capacity with full clearance. At some of these dinners, very sensitive matters are discussed. Mm-hmm. And when they found out, our allies were furious that they had been disclosing information to someone that didn't have a clearance, likely because he was compromised. There's allegations that he's been compromised by the Iranians. And so all of this could have been avoided. But again, another case of incompetence of the State Department under the Biden-Harris administration here.
How concerned should we be about Iranian infiltration at other agencies and to the extent that they're able to work their way and advance their interests in other agencies of our own government?
Look, the Iranian regime is one of the most pernicious and dangerous regimes on this counterintelligence side, on this intelligence infiltration side. One thing that they've been wanting to do is they've wanted to compromise the White House, compromise the Pentagon. And currently, the chief of staff of what's called the Solik office, which does special operations, is a member of the Iranian Experts Initiative, which is something created by the Iranian Foreign Ministry to advance their agenda in American think tanks. This person was given a clearance, even though she was under investigation, even though she was basically part of this Iranian influence scheme. And when that became revealed, a lot of Republican lawmakers called her to be stripped and fired and stripped of her clearance. She is still in that position today, working with access to some of the nation's most highly guarded secrets.
Amazing. All right, let me. I also want to ask you a little bit about what we saw this week play out in Lebanon. There were a number of explosions all across the country that seemed to be emanating from small pagers and then subsequently walkie-talkie devices carried by Hezbollah terrorists. And now we're seeing all sorts of reports that this was Israel's doing, that they successfully pulled off these very targeted strikes on Hezbollah fighters. What do we know about all of this?
Well, I think it's certainly, if you eliminate all the other people who don't have an interest, Israel seems the most likely candidate for pulling off both something so advanced and simultaneously. This is sort of what Israeli intelligence is famed for, these massive operations like this. What we know is over 4,000 were injured in the first attack, and I think about a dozen killed. And then the next day, exploding walkie-talkies injured another 400 and killed perhaps another dozen. Again, let's really be really clear. The targets here are Hezbollah, who blew up 241 Marines back in 1983, who kidnapped and tortured huge numbers of American citizens, and which is a perfect proxy of the Iranian regime. This is a government that wants to kill every American it can get its hands on. They won't hesitate to do that. And so if it was Israel who did this, kudos to them for taking out and literally blinding a huge number of terrorist operatives. Without these devices, Hezbollah is pretty much blind on its own communications network. They had ditched cell phones because they understood the Israelis could monitor and use them to target them. So they went low tech. They went with pagers, they went with walkie-talkies. And it's pretty evident that Israel compromised their supply chain, laced them with explosive batteries, and we've all seen the videos of what's happened next. So I think big picture, on October 7th, Israel's intelligence was the one that made huge mistakes. They've regained their war footing. They're back on the offense. And I think what we need to look at next is whether Israel goes further and opens the military front in Lebanon.
It's amazing, though. It's like you wonder to what extent our heads rolling today and in the upper tiers of Hezbollah for, arranging all these purchases of both walkie-talkies and pagers that turned out to all come from Israeli intelligence.
Exactly. I think the head of procurement should probably get canned if he still has his head or his fingers and eyes still about him. This is incredibly embarrassing. One thing that we've seen actually is there was a message on Chinese social media saying that they have gotten massive overnight orders from Middle East clients saying that they want new communications devices and they have to be made entirely in China with no foreign sourcing. So we're seeing across the Middle East people being paranoid that Israel has compromised their supply chain as well. And either way, I think what we've seen from Israel is the ability to be agile, nimble, creative. And that's why Israel is ultimately going to continue to secure itself against the terrorists on its periphery.
It's amazing. Gabriel Noronha, as always, sir, thank you very much from Polaris National Security. Really good to talk to you today.